The Architecture of Achievement, Mastering the Inner and Outer Game of Life and Leadership. Book 1, The Inner Architecture. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Nobody Sees. Summary: we're going to explore why some people seem to accomplish remarkable things, while others with equal talent spin their wheels. The answer isn't intelligence or luck. It's something far more controllable. We're talking about the invisible architecture of habits, the mental frameworks that either support or sabotage everything you attempt. By the end of this chapter, you'll understand why your current approach to change might be working against human nature itself. And you'll have the blueprint for building a personal operating system that actually works. Here's something nobody tells you when you're young. The quality of your life isn't determined by the big decisions you make in dramatic moments. It's determined by the tiny decisions you make every single day without even thinking about them. Think about that for a second. When you look at someone who's fit, successful in their career, and has great relationships, you might assume they possess some extraordinary willpower or talent. But what you're really seeing is the compound interest of thousands of small, smart choices made consistently over time. Here's the problem, though. Most of us approach personal change like we're trying to wrestle a bear. We rely on motivation, willpower, and sheer grit, and when those inevitably run out, because they always do, we blame ourselves. We think we're weak. We think we lack discipline. The truth is, we're fighting against the way our brains are actually wired. Why your brain hates change. Your brain is essentially a prediction machine. It's constantly trying to figure out what's going to happen next, so it can prepare your body to respond. When you do something repeatedly, your brain creates a neural pathway for it. Think of it like carving a path through a dense forest. The first time through is brutal. You're hacking away at branches, stumbling over roots. But each subsequent trip makes the path a little clearer, a little easier to travel. This is why established habits feel automatic. Your brain has paved a superhighway for that behavior. When you try to start a new habit, you're asking your brain to abandon that smooth highway and start bushwhacking through uncharted territory. Your brain, being efficient, resists this. It wants to stay on the paved road. This explains why motivation-based approaches to change almost always fail. Motivation is an emotion, and emotions are fleeting. You might feel incredibly motivated to work out on Monday morning, but by Wednesday afternoon, that motivation has evaporated, and your brain is screaming at you to stay on the couch where it's comfortable. The elastic solution. So what's the alternative? Instead of fighting your brain's natural tendencies, what if you worked with them? What if you created habits so flexible that they could bend rather than break when life gets complicated? This is the core insight that changes everything. Rigidity kills habits. When you create a habit that requires perfection, I will work out for exactly 45 minutes every single day, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because the moment you have a day where 45 minutes isn't possible, your brain marks that habit as failed, and it becomes exponentially harder to get back on track. The solution is what we might call elastic habits. Patterns of behavior that can expand and contract based on your circumstances without ever breaking. Think of it like a rubber band. You can stretch it far or keep it tight, but it always maintains its essential nature. Here's how this works in practice. Instead of having one fixed target for a habit, you create multiple levels of success. Let's say you want to establish a reading habit. Instead of committing to read for 30 minutes every day, you create 3 tiers. The minimum viable action. Read 1 page. That's it. Anyone can do this, no matter how tired or busy they are. The moderate target. Read for 15 minutes. This is a solid, satisfying amount. The stretch goal. Read for 45 minutes. This is for days when you're feeling energized and engaged. Here's the magic. No matter which level you hit, you've succeeded. You've kept the habit alive. Your brain gets its reward signal. The neural pathway gets reinforced. And crucially, you never have to experience the demoralizing feeling of failing at your habit. This approach completely transforms the psychology of habit formation. Instead of dreading your habits as obligations you might fail to meet, you start looking forward to them as opportunities to succeed at different levels. On your worst day, you can still win. On your best day, you can absolutely crush it. the identity connection. Now, there's something even deeper happening here that most people miss. Every time you take an action, you're not just doing something. You're casting a vote for the kind of person you believe yourself to be. If you skip your workout, you're not just missing exercise. You're reinforcing the identity of someone who doesn't follow through. If you read one page on a busy day instead of skipping entirely, you're voting for the identity of someone who reads consistently, no matter what. This is why the minimum viable action is so powerful. It's not really about that one page. It's about maintaining the identity. It's about telling yourself, I am still the person who does this. Over time, these identity votes accumulate. They become the story you tell yourself about who you are. And once you fully internalize an identity, the behaviors that match it become almost effortless. You don't have to force yourself to brush your teeth. You just do it, because you're someone who takes care of their teeth. The same principle applies to any habit you want to build. The architecture of your day. Let's zoom out even further. Your habits don't exist in isolation. They're part of a larger architecture, the structure of your day, your environment, your relationships. And most people never think about designing this architecture intentionally. They just let it happen to them. Think about your morning routine. Do you have one? If you do, was it consciously designed, or did it just evolve randomly? Most people's mornings are a chaotic scramble that sets a reactive tone for the entire day. They wake up, grab their phone, and immediately start responding to other people's priorities, emails, messages, notifications. What if instead, you designed your morning architecture to support the person you want to become? What if the first 30 minutes of your day was sacred time for the activities that matter most to you, protected from the demands of the outside world? This is what it means to build an architecture of achievement. It's not about heroic acts of willpower. It's about creating an environment and a set of routines that make success the path of least resistance. The communication foundation. Before we move on, we need to address something that underpins all of this: the way you talk to yourself and others. Your internal dialogue, that constant stream of self-talk running through your mind, is either your greatest ally or your worst enemy. Most people have an inner critic that's absolutely brutal. You're not good enough. You'll never succeed. Who do you think you are? This voice is so constant and so familiar that most people don't even notice it anymore. It's just the background noise of their lives. But here's what's crucial to understand. That voice isn't the truth. It's a habit. It's a well-worn neural pathway, just like any other habit. And like any other habit, it can be changed. The first step is simply becoming aware of it. Start noticing what you say to yourself when you make a mistake or face a challenge. Would you talk to a friend that way? Would you talk to a child that way? If not, why are you talking to yourself that way? The second step is consciously replacing those patterns with something more constructive. This isn't about empty positive thinking. It's about accuracy. When your inner critic says, "You always mess things up," the accurate response is, "Actually, I succeed at most things I attempt, and this setback is a learning opportunity, not a final verdict." The power of precise language. This extends to how you communicate with others. Most people are sloppy with their words. They use vague language, make assumptions, and then wonder why there are misunderstandings and conflicts. Precision in communication isn't about being pedantic. It's about being effective. When you can clearly articulate what you mean, what you need, and what you expect, you eliminate the ambiguity that causes most interpersonal problems. Think about the difference between saying "I need that report soon" and "I need that report by 3 p.m. Thursday so I can review it before our client meeting Friday morning." Same basic request, completely different likelihood of getting what you actually need. This precision applies to every domain of communication: requests, refusals, apologies, expressions of appreciation, difficult conversations. In each case, the quality of your words determines the quality of your outcomes. The key takeaway: your life is built on an invisible architecture of habits, self-talk, and communication patterns. You can either let this architecture evolve randomly, or you can design it intentionally to support the person you want to become. Reflection prompt: What's one habit you've been trying to build with a rigid all-or-nothing approach? How could you redesign it with multiple levels of success so you can win every day? Chapter 2. The Stories We Tell Ourselves. Summary. We all carry internal narratives that shape everything we do, yet most of us have never examined these stories critically. This chapter explores how the language we use, both internally and externally, creates our reality. We'll look at why certain communication patterns lead to frustration, while others create connection, and we'll learn specific techniques for rewriting the scripts that have been holding us back. By the end, you'll have practical tools for transforming yourself, talk and your conversations with others. Let me tell you about a client I worked with years ago. He was brilliant, genuinely one of the smartest people I'd ever met. He had great ideas, strong work ethic, and people generally liked him. But his career had stalled, and he couldn't figure out why. As we talked, I started noticing a pattern in his language. Every time he described a success, he attributed it to luck. I got lucky on that project. The timing just worked out. But every time he described a failure, he attributed it to personal deficiency. I just wasn't prepared enough. I dropped the ball. This man was telling himself a story in which he was fundamentally inadequate, and any evidence to the contrary was just coincidence. This story wasn't true, but he'd been telling it to himself for so long that it had become his reality. And because he believed it, he acted in ways that made it come true. He didn't pursue promotions because he wasn't ready. He didn't speak up in meetings because his ideas probably weren't good enough. Your internal narrative is the most powerful force in your life that you never think about. It's the lens through which you interpret everything that happens to you. And if that lens is cracked or distorted, you'll never see reality clearly. The architecture of self. Talk. Let's get specific about what destructive self-talk looks like, because recognizing it is the first step to changing it. There's a pattern I call the certainty trap. It's when you state opinions and fears as if they're established facts. This is never going to work. I'm just not a creative person. Nobody respects me around here. These statements feel true when you think them, but they're actually interpretations, and usually distorted ones at that. The problem with stating interpretations as facts is that your brain believes what you tell it. If you constantly tell your brain, "I'm terrible at public speaking," your brain will generate anxiety whenever public speaking comes up, which will make you perform poorly, which will confirm the original belief. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now here's the crucial insight that changes everything. You don't have to believe everything you think. Just because a thought appears in your mind doesn't mean it's true, helpful, or worth engaging with. You can observe your thoughts without accepting them. This is what meditation practices teach, the ability to watch thoughts arise without getting caught up in them. You realize that you are not your thoughts. You're the awareness that notices the thoughts. And from that position of awareness, you can choose which thoughts to engage with and which to let pass by. Rewriting the script. Once you can observe your thoughts with some distance, you can start deliberately choosing more accurate and helpful thoughts to replace the destructive ones. This isn't about lying to yourself with empty positive affirmations. If you're terrible at something, telling yourself, "I'm amazing at this," won't help because a part of you knows it's not true. What does help is shifting to a growth-oriented perspective. "I'm not good at this yet, but I can improve with practice." Notice the difference. The first statement is a fixed judgment about your identity. The second is an accurate assessment of your current skill level combined with a belief in your capacity to grow. One creates helplessness. The other creates possibility. This same principle applies to how you interpret events. When something goes wrong, the destructive pattern is to make it personal. "I'm a failure." Permanent. "This always happens to me," and pervasive. "This ruins everything." The constructive pattern is to see it as specific. "This particular approach didn't work. Temporary. I can try something different next time," and limited in scope. "This is frustrating, but other areas of my life are still going well." The outer voice now, the way you talk to yourself shapes the way you talk to others, and vice versa. They're part of the same system. So, let's talk about interpersonal communication. the words you choose when you're interacting with the world. Most communication problems stem from a simple misunderstanding. We assume that what we say is what the other person hears, but communication doesn't work that way. Every message passes through multiple filters. The other person's mood, their history with you, their assumptions about your intentions, their own internal narrative. What comes out the other side can be completely different from what went in. This is why precision matters so much. When you're vague, you're essentially asking the other person to fill in the blanks with their own assumptions, and their assumptions will often be wrong. But precision alone isn't enough. There's also the matter of how you frame things. The same basic message can be delivered in ways that create defensiveness or ways that create openness. The difference often comes down to something simple, focusing on your own experience rather than making accusations about the other person. I feel frustrated when meetings start late lands very differently than "you're always late to meetings and you don't respect anyone's time." The first statement is about your experience, which is undeniable. The second is an attack on character, which will almost certainly trigger defensiveness. The art of the difficult conversation. Some conversations are inherently uncomfortable. Delivering criticism, setting a boundary, saying no to a request, acknowledging a mistake. Most people avoid these conversations entirely, or they handle them poorly and damage the relationship. There's a framework that makes difficult conversations much more manageable. It starts with getting clear on your intention. What do you actually want to accomplish? Do you want to punish the other person, prove you're right, or do you want to solve a problem and preserve the relationship? If your intention is genuinely constructive, the conversation becomes much easier to navigate. You can acknowledge the discomfort directly. This is an awkward conversation, and I want to have it because I value our relationship and I think we can work through this. Then you state the issue clearly and specifically, using I. Statements that describe your experience rather than accusations. I noticed that the last 3 reports were submitted after the deadline. I'm concerned because this affects the team's ability to meet our commitments. Then, and this is crucial, you invite the other person's perspective. I want to understand what's happening from your side. Can you help me see what's going on? This transforms the conversation from an attack into a collaboration. You're solving a problem together, not fighting each other. The power of the right words. There are certain situations in life where finding the right words feels almost impossible. Expressing sympathy when someone has suffered a loss, apologizing when you've made a serious mistake, asking for help when you feel vulnerable, standing up for yourself when you've been treated unfairly. In these moments, having the right words available makes all the difference between expressing yourself effectively and stumbling into misunderstanding or conflict. The key is preparation. You don't need to script every conversation. That would be impossible and weird. But you can prepare for the types of situations you commonly encounter. What are the right words for declining an invitation without causing offense? For giving constructive feedback without demoralizing someone? For expressing disagreement without starting an argument? When you have these patterns ready, you can adapt them to the specific situation rather than fumbling for words in the moment. It's like having a well-stocked toolkit. You don't use every tool every day, but when you need one, you're glad it's there. The correspondence principle. Let's talk about written communication, because it's become more important than ever. Email, text messages, social media, we're constantly writing to each other, and written communication has a unique challenge. There's no tone of voice, no facial expression, no body language to provide context. This is why written messages are so easily misinterpreted. Something that was meant to be straightforward comes across as cold. Something that was meant to be humorous comes across as insulting. Something that was meant to be urgent comes across as demanding. The solution isn't to avoid written communication. That's not realistic. It's to be more intentional about it. Before you hit send, read your message from the recipient's perspective. How might this land if they're having a bad day? If they're stressed? If they don't know you well? A few extra words of context can make all the difference. I'm not upset about this. Just want to make sure we're aligned. Takes 5 seconds to type and can prevent hours of misunderstanding. The key takeaway: the stories you tell yourself and the words you speak to others aren't just descriptions of reality, they're creating your reality. By becoming more intentional about your internal and external language, you can transform your experience of life. Reflection prompt: what's one recurring negative thought you have about yourself? How could you reframe it in a way that's both accurate and empowering? Chapter 3: Deciding what matters. Summary: we're going to explore the art and science of effective decision-making. Most people make decisions reactively based on whatever seems most urgent in the moment, but truly effective people have a different approach. They know which decisions actually matter. They have a process for making those decisions well. And perhaps most importantly, they have the courage to make the tough calls that others avoid. By the end of this chapter, you'll have a framework for making better decisions in every area of your life. Let me ask you something. How many decisions do you think you made yesterday? If you're like most people, you probably thought of a handful. Maybe what to wear, what to eat, which tasks to prioritize. But the actual number is staggering. Researchers estimate that the average adult makes about 35,000 decisions per day. Most of these are unconscious: which foot to put forward first when you start walking, exactly how to position your fingers on your keyboard. But even the conscious decisions number in the hundreds. Here's the problem: decision-making is mentally expensive. Every choice you make depletes a limited resource. This is why judges start making worse decisions as the day goes on. Their decision-making capacity literally gets used up. It's why Steve Jobs wore the same outfit every day. He wasn't making a fashion statement. He was preserving his decision, making energy for things that actually mattered. The effectiveness filter. So how do you make sure your decision-making energy is being spent on the right things? You need a filter. You need criteria for determining which decisions deserve your full attention and which ones you can handle quickly or delegate entirely. The most effective people I've observed have a simple mental algorithm for this. When faced with any decision, they ask, if I get this wrong, what are the consequences? If the answer is not much, they make the decision quickly and move on. They don't agonize over which restaurant to choose or which font to use in a presentation. They save their energy for the decisions where being wrong would have significant consequences. But here's where it gets interesting. For the decisions that do matter, effective people don't just think harder. They have a systematic process. The decision process. Effective decision-making isn't about being smarter or more intuitive than other people. It's about following a process that compensates for the brain's natural biases and limitations. The process starts with something counterintuitive. You don't begin by gathering facts. You begin by forming an opinion. Here's why. If you start with facts, you'll unconsciously select the facts that support what you already want to believe. But if you explicitly state your opinion as a hypothesis to be tested, you can then honestly evaluate whether the evidence supports it or not. So step 1 is, here's what I think we should do, and here's why. You put your cards on the table. Step 2 is, what would need to be true for this to be the wrong decision? You actively seek out evidence and perspectives that challenge your hypothesis. This is uncomfortable, which is why most people don't do it, but it's essential for good decision-making. Step 3 is, what are we not seeing? Every decision has blind spots, factors you haven't considered, consequences you haven't anticipated, perspectives you haven't consulted. Good decision makers are paranoid about their blind spots and aggressively seek to illuminate them. Step 4 is, what are the boundary conditions? Every decision has requirements it must satisfy to be successful. If you're deciding whether to launch a new product, the boundary conditions might include must be profitable within 18 months and must not cannibalize existing product lines by more than 20%. If a proposed solution doesn't meet these conditions, it's not viable, no matter how attractive it seems. The courage to decide. Here's the part of decision-making that no framework can fully address: the emotional difficulty. Important decisions are hard because they involve uncertainty, trade-offs, and the possibility of being wrong. And many people deal with this difficulty by simply avoiding the decision. They ask for more data, more analysis, more time. They say they want to be thorough, but really they're just afraid of making the wrong call. Meanwhile, the window of opportunity closes, or the situation deteriorates to the point where the decision is made for them. Effective decision makers have learned that a pretty good decision made quickly is usually better than a perfect decision made too late. They know that most decisions can be adjusted or reversed if they turn out to be wrong. And they know that the cost of indecision is often higher than the cost of a wrong decision. This doesn't mean being reckless. It means having the courage to act when you have enough information. Not all the information, which you'll never have, but enough. It means accepting that uncertainty is part of the deal and making your best judgment anyway. The two types of decisions. One of the most useful distinctions in decision-making is between generic decisions and unique decisions. A generic decision is one that will come up repeatedly, so it requires a rule or principle. A unique decision is truly one of a kind and can be handled on its own merits. The mistake most people make is treating generic situations as if they were unique. They decide each case individually, making up new criteria each time, reinventing the wheel. This is exhausting and leads to inconsistent results. Effective people do the opposite. When faced with a problem, they first ask, is this a symptom of a deeper issue? Is there a pattern here? If so, they don't just solve the immediate problem. They create a rule or policy that will handle all similar situations going forward. This is how you scale your decision making. Instead of making 100 decisions, you make one decision that covers 100 situations. It's the difference between a manager who personally approves every expense report and one who creates a clear expense policy that everyone can follow without supervision. The people decisions. The hardest and most important decisions are almost always about people. Who to hire, who to promote, who to reassign, who to let go. These decisions are hard because people are complex. You never have complete information about someone's capabilities, motivations, or future performance. And the stakes are high. A bad people decision can damage team morale, productivity, and results for years. Effective leaders approach people decisions with appropriate humility. They know that even with a thorough process, about 1/3 of people decisions will turn out to be unsuccessful. So they build in review mechanisms. 6 to 12 months after a key people decision, they formally assess how it's working out. If the person isn't succeeding, they don't necessarily blame the person. They ask whether they made the right decision, or whether the role was properly structured, or whether the person is in the wrong seat. And when a people decision clearly isn't working, effective leaders act. They don't let underperformers linger in important roles, damaging the organization and demoralizing the team. This is perhaps the hardest kind of courage, the courage to admit you made a mistake and to have the difficult conversation that follows. The contribution question. There's one question that effective people ask themselves constantly, and it's the question that orients all their decisions. That question is, what can I contribute? This isn't about being selfless or noble, it's about effectiveness. The people who focus on contribution rather than effort are the ones who make the biggest impact. They're not worried about their title, their status, or what they're owed. They're focused on results. When you orient your decisions around contribution, everything becomes clearer. Which project should you work on? The one where you can make the biggest contribution. Which meeting should you attend? The one where your contribution is most needed. What should you say in that difficult conversation? Whatever will contribute most to a positive outcome. This orientation also makes you more valuable to others. People want to work with someone who's focused on making things better, not on protecting their turf or advancing their agenda. The contribution, focused person becomes the person everyone wants on their team. The key takeaway: effective decision making isn't about being smarter, it's about having a process for determining which decisions matter, systematically evaluating options, and having the courage to act even when you're uncertain. And the best decisions are always oriented around contribution rather than ego. Reflection prompt. Think of an important decision you're currently facing. What are the boundary conditions this decision must satisfy? What opinion are you starting with, and how could you test it against alternative perspectives? Book 2. the outer architecture. Chapter 4, the strategy question summary. We've been talking about personal effectiveness, but now we need to zoom out and think about how organizations work. Whether you're leading a company, a team, or just your own career, you need a strategy. But most of what people call strategy isn't strategy at all. It's just wishful thinking dressed up in business language. In this chapter, we'll learn what real strategy looks like, why so much of what passes for strategy is actually harmful, and how to create a strategy that actually works. I want to tell you a story that perfectly captures the difference between real strategy and the fake stuff that most organizations produce. In 1805, England faced a serious problem. Napoleon had conquered much of Europe and was preparing to invade England. But to cross the English Channel, he needed naval superiority. Off the coast of Spain, the combined French and Spanish fleet, 33 ships, met the smaller British fleet of 27 ships. Now, the standard naval tactic of the time was for opposing fleets to form parallel lines and fire at each other. It was basically a slugfest. Whoever had more ships and better gunners would win. The French and Spanish had more ships, but British Admiral Lord Nelson had a strategic insight. Instead of following the standard playbook, he split his fleet into 2 columns and drove them perpendicularly into the enemy line. This was risky. His lead ships would be exposed to heavy fire as they approached. But Nelson judged that the less trained enemy gunners wouldn't handle the heavy seas well that day. The result? The British destroyed 22 enemy ships and lost none. Nelson was killed, but he became Britain's greatest naval hero. Britain's naval dominance was secured for over a century. Now, here's what I want you to notice about this story. Nelson's strategy was simple enough to explain in a paragraph. It didn't require 100 PowerPoint slides. It wasn't a vague aspiration like achieve naval superiority through excellence. It was a specific, coherent response to a specific challenge. It focused resources on a decisive point, and it involved real risk. This is what real strategy looks like, and it's shockingly rare. The bad strategy epidemic. Most organizations don't have strategies. They have what I call bad strategy, a toxic mixture of fluffy language, ambitious goals, and wishful thinking that provides no real guidance for action. Bad strategy has 4 hallmarks. First, there's fluff. High-sounding words and complex diagrams that create the illusion of deep thinking while saying nothing of substance. A bank that describes its strategy as customer-centric intermediation is just using fancy words to say, we're a bank. Second, there's the failure to face the challenge. A strategy is supposed to be a response to a difficulty. If you don't clearly define the difficulty, you can't possibly have a strategy for overcoming it. Yet most strategic plans never mention the real problems the organization faces. Third, there's mistaking goals for strategy. Grow revenue by 20% and improve margins is a goal, not a strategy. A strategy would explain how you're going to achieve that growth and margin improvement in the face of specific competitive challenges. Fourth, there are bad strategic objectives, either a laundry list of unrelated things to do or blue sky aspirations that nobody knows how to actually achieve. Why is bad strategy so common? Partly because real strategy is hard. It requires making choices, which means saying no to some possibilities. It requires facing uncomfortable truths about your situation. It requires taking responsibility for outcomes rather than just setting targets and hoping for the best. But there's also a deeper reason. Many leaders have bought into a philosophy that says positive thinking is the key to success, that if you just envision your goals vividly enough and believe strongly enough, the universe will somehow make it happen. This is magical thinking, not management. Real strategy requires confronting what could go wrong, not just imagining what could go right. The kernel of good strategy. So what does good strategy actually look like? It has 3 essential elements that form what I call the kernel. First, there's a diagnosis. This is your analysis of what's really going on. What's the critical challenge you're facing? A good diagnosis simplifies the overwhelming complexity of reality by identifying which aspects of the situation are most important. It's like a doctor examining a patient with multiple symptoms and determining the underlying disease. For example, when Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, his diagnosis was simple. Apple was trying to do too many things and was losing focus. The company had 15 different desktop models, multiple portable models, printers, and various other products. It was spread too thin and bleeding cash. Second, there's a guiding policy. This is your overall approach to dealing with the challenge identified in the diagnosis. It's not a detailed plan of action. It's more like a signpost pointing the general direction. A guiding policy creates advantage by focusing resources, reducing complexity, and setting boundaries for action. Jobs' guiding policy was equally simple. Simplify. Cut back to a core product line that Apple could execute well. Focus on a few great products instead of many mediocre ones. Third, there are coherent actions. These are the specific steps you take to implement the guiding policy. They should be coordinated with each other, not a random collection of initiatives. Each action should reinforce the others. Jobs cut all desktop models back to one. He cut portable models back to one laptop. He eliminated printers and peripherals entirely. He cut distributors and retail partners. He moved manufacturing to Asia. All of these actions were consistent with the guiding policy of simplification and focus. The result? Within a year, Apple was profitable again. Within a decade, it had become one of the most valuable companies in the world. Discovering hidden power. The best strategies don't just respond to obvious challenges. They uncover hidden sources of advantage that others have missed. They see the situation differently and find leverage where nobody else thought to look. Think about the biblical story of David and Goliath. Everyone assumed Goliath's size and strength made him unbeatable in close combat. David looked at the situation differently and saw that Goliath's size actually made him a bigger target, slower and less agile. David's skill with a sling, dismissed by others as irrelevant, allowed him to strike from a distance where Goliath's superior strength was meaningless. Business history is full of similar examples. When Sam Walton was building Walmart, the conventional wisdom was that a full-line discount store needed a population base of at least 100,000 people. Walton put big stores in small towns. He wasn't breaking the economic logic. He was redefining what a store was. By linking 150 small-town stores into a network with a central distribution system, he effectively created a store that served millions of people across the entire network. The network, not the individual store, became the operating unit. This insight, seeing the network as the store rather than the individual location, was hidden in plain sight. Anyone could have thought of it. But nobody did until Walton. Strategy as hypothesis. One of the most important things to understand about strategy is that it's inherently uncertain. You're making a bet about how the world will work, and you won't know if you're right until you try it. This means that good strategy has the logical structure of a scientific hypothesis. You make your best judgment based on available evidence. You formulate a plan to test that judgment, you observe the results carefully, and you adjust based on what you learn. This scientific approach to strategy is very different from the way most organizations operate. They create a plan, commit to it, and then defend it against all evidence. They treat deviation from the plan as failure. But in a complex and changing world, the willingness to learn and adapt is more important than sticking to your original plan. Howard Schultz's experience with Starbucks illustrates this perfectly. His original hypothesis was that Americans would embrace the Italian espresso bar experience, standing at a counter, drinking from tiny porcelain cups, with opera music playing in the background. He opened his first store, Tui Giornale, as a direct copy of an Italian bar. And he discovered that Americans wanted something different. They wanted chairs, they wanted takeout cups, they wanted non-fat milk in their lattes. They didn't want opera music. Schultz adapted, and the result was the Starbucks we know today, inspired by Italian coffee culture, but thoroughly American in execution. If Schultz had rigidly stuck to his original vision, Starbucks would have remained a single quirky espresso bar. His willingness to treat his strategy as a hypothesis and adjust based on evidence is what enabled the company to scale. The key takeaway: real strategy is simple, specific, and coherent. It starts with an honest diagnosis of the challenge, identifies a guiding policy for addressing it, and specifies coordinated actions that implement the policy. And it treats the whole thing as a hypothesis to be tested and refined. Reflection prompt. Think about your organization or your career. What's the critical challenge you're currently facing? What would a coherent strategy for addressing that challenge look like, including a clear diagnosis, a guiding policy, and specific coordinated actions? Chapter 5. The People Architecture. Summary. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have the right people and the right culture to execute it, that strategy is worthless. This chapter explores how to build an organization where people are aligned, engaged, and empowered to do their best work. We'll learn why most organizations are smart but not healthy, and how to bridge that gap. By the end, you'll understand the 4 disciplines that create organizational health and why they matter more than any strategic brilliance. Imagine 2 companies in the same industry. They have access to the same technology, the same talent pool, the same market data. One of them consistently outperforms the other. Why? Most people would assume it's because the successful company has a better strategy, or smarter leaders, or more innovative products. But after decades of studying organizations, I've concluded that the real difference is usually something else entirely. The successful company is healthier. Organizational health isn't about being nice or creating a feel-good workplace. It's about creating an organization where there's minimal politics, minimal confusion, high morale, high productivity, and low turnover. It's about building a place where the truth is spoken, where people are aligned around a common purpose, and where everyone is pulling in the same direction. Here's the thing that most leaders don't want to admit. Being smart is the easy part. Strategy, marketing, finance, technology, these are decision sciences. You can hire smart people, analyze data, and figure out the right answers. But being healthy, that's harder. It requires dealing with messy human emotions, having uncomfortable conversations, and making decisions that upset people. It's subjective, unpredictable, and often painful. So most leaders avoid it. They focus on the smart stuff because it's safer and more comfortable. They tweak the strategy and optimize the operations and analyze the data, all while the organization slowly rots from within due to politics, confusion, and disengagement. The multiplier effect. Organizational health isn't just a nice to have, it's a multiplier of intelligence. Think about it this way. An unhealthy organization with brilliant people will only tap into a fraction of their intelligence. The politics, the confusion, the lack of alignment, all of this prevents smart people from contributing their best thinking. They spend their energy on self-protection rather than problem-solving. They withhold information rather than sharing it. They avoid difficult conversations rather than having them. A healthy organization with moderately intelligent people will tap into nearly all of their intelligence. There's no politics getting in the way. People are aligned, so energy isn't wasted on internal conflict. The truth gets spoken, so problems get solved quickly. Everyone is pulling in the same direction, so effort is multiplied rather than divided. The result? The healthy organization often outperforms the smarter but unhealthy one. Not because its people are smarter, but because they're able to actually use more of the intelligence they have. The first discipline. Build a cohesive leadership team. Organizational health starts at the top. If the leadership team isn't functioning well, nothing else in the organization will function well either. It's like a family where the parents have a dysfunctional relationship. The kids suffer no matter what else is going on. A cohesive leadership team has 5 key characteristics. First, they trust each other. Not the superficial, I trust you to do your job kind of trust, but vulnerability-based trust. The willingness to admit mistakes, acknowledge weaknesses, and ask for help without fear of being punished for it. This kind of trust doesn't happen automatically. It has to be built intentionally, and the leader has to go first. If the leader isn't willing to be vulnerable, to admit when they're wrong, to acknowledge what they don't know, nobody else will feel safe doing it either. Second, cohesive teams engage in productive conflict. They debate ideas passionately. They don't hold back their opinions to be polite. They know that the best decisions emerge from the clash of different perspectives, not from premature consensus. This is uncomfortable for most people. We're conditioned to avoid conflict, but teams that avoid conflict end up having fake conversations where nobody says what they really think, and the real debates happen in the hallway afterward where nothing can be resolved. Third, cohesive teams achieve commitment. After the debate, they rally around the decision, even if they initially disagreed with it. They don't sit in the back of the room with their arms crossed, waiting for the decision to fail so they can say, "I told you so." They commit fully to making it work. Fourth, cohesive teams hold each other accountable. They don't rely on the leader to be the only source of accountability. When a team member isn't meeting their commitments, other team members call them on it directly. This is peer-to-peer accountability, and it's far more powerful than top-down enforcement. Fifth, cohesive teams focus on collective results. They put the team's goals ahead of their own departmental goals. They don't say, "My division did great, too bad the rest of the company struggled." They win or lose together. The second discipline: create clarity. Once the leadership team is cohesive, it needs to get aligned around a few fundamental questions. Without this alignment, employees throughout the organization will receive mixed messages and become confused about what's really important. The first question is, why do we exist? This is about purpose, not profit. Every organization exists to make something better for someone. What's your reason for being? What would the world lose if your organization disappeared? The second question is, how do we behave? These are your core values, the handful of behavioral rules that define your culture. Not generic words like integrity and excellence that every organization claims. Specific, distinctive values that actually guide behavior and decision-making. The third question is, what do we do? This is your business definition, a concrete, jargon-free description of what your organization actually does. The fourth question is, how will we succeed? This is your strategy, the 3 or 4 decisions that define how you'll differentiate from competitors and win in your market. The fifth question is, what's most important right now? This is your thematic goal, the single top priority for the current period. Not a list of 10 priorities, which really means no priorities. One thing that everyone in the organization is focused on achieving. The sixth question is, who must do what? This is about clear roles and responsibilities, no ambiguity about who owns what. The third discipline: over-communicate clarity. Once the leadership team is aligned around these answers, they need to communicate them relentlessly. And I mean relentlessly. Employees need to hear the message 7 times before they truly believe it. Great leaders see themselves as chief reminding officers. Most leaders drastically underestimate how much communication is required. They think sending an email or giving a speech at the annual meeting is sufficient. It's not. Employees are bombarded with messages every day. Your strategic priorities are competing with hundreds of other demands for their attention. If you're not constantly reinforcing what matters, it will get lost. This is where cascading communication becomes essential. After every leadership team meeting, the team members need to go back to their departments and communicate what was discussed and decided, not via email, live and in person, where people can ask questions and get clarification. And they need to do it consistently, within a consistent time frame, so employees learn to expect and trust the communication. The fourth discipline: reinforce clarity. Finally, every human system in the organization needs to reinforce the answers to those 6 questions. Hiring processes should screen for cultural fit based on your values. Onboarding should immerse new employees in your purpose and strategy. Performance management should be built around your priorities. Recognition and rewards should celebrate behaviors that exemplify your values. And when someone consistently violates the values, they need to be let go, regardless of their individual performance. Most organizations have generic human systems that could apply to any company. They downloaded their performance review forms from the internet. Their values are posted on the wall, but have no connection to how people are actually hired, managed, or rewarded. This is worse than useless. It breeds cynicism. The goal is to create an organization where the way we do things around here is so clear that everyone can make decisions confidently, without needing to ask permission. When employees know the values, the strategy, and the priorities, they can act autonomously while remaining aligned with the whole. The key takeaway: organizational health, the absence of politics, confusion, and disengagement, is the single greatest competitive advantage any organization can have. It requires a cohesive leadership team, absolute clarity about purpose and direction, relentless communication of that clarity, and human systems that reinforce it at every turn. Reflection prompt. Think about your team or organization. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate its health? What's one thing you could do this week to improve trust, clarify purpose, or better communicate what matters most? Chapter 6. The Execution Engine. Summary. Great strategy and healthy culture are necessary but not sufficient. You also need to actually execute, to turn plans into results. This chapter explores the disciplines of execution, how to set priorities that actually get done, how to gather the right data to guide decisions, and how to establish meeting rhythms that keep everyone aligned without drowning in bureaucracy. By the end, you'll have practical tools for closing the gap between what you intend to do and what you actually accomplish. Let me paint you a picture of what most organizations look like from the inside. The leadership team has just returned from their annual strategic planning off-site. They're energized. They've got a beautiful plan with clear goals and inspiring language. PowerPoint slides have been distributed. Emails have been sent. Everyone feels good. 6 months later, nothing has changed. The plan is sitting on a shelf somewhere. People are doing exactly what they were doing before the offsite. The strategic priorities have been buried under the daily avalanche of email and meetings and urgent requests that aren't actually important. Why does this happen? It's not because the plan was bad. It's not because people are lazy or resistant to change. It's because execution requires a completely different set of disciplines than planning, and most organizations never develop those disciplines. The priority principle. Here's the first and most important discipline. Focus on one thing at a time. This sounds obvious, but almost nobody does it. Look at any organization's list of strategic priorities, and you'll typically find 7, 10, even 15 top priorities. By definition, a priority implies that some things are more important than others. If everything is a priority, nothing is. The human brain simply cannot focus effectively on multiple important things simultaneously. When you try to juggle 7 priorities, what actually happens is that you make a little progress on each of them, never enough to achieve breakthrough on any of them. Meanwhile, the truly important work gets buried under the urgent, but not important stuff that fills everyone's day. The solution is brutally simple. Identify the single most important thing that needs to happen in the next quarter to move the organization forward. Just one. This is your critical number. The one metric that, if you move it, will have the biggest impact on everything else. Then wrap that critical number in a theme that makes it memorable and engaging. Don't just say, "We need to improve customer retention." Create a campaign around it. Give it a name. Create visuals. Make it a game with a clear finish line and a celebration at the end. This quarterly theme becomes the rallying cry for the entire organization. Everyone knows what the main thing is. Everyone can see how they're contributing to it. Everyone can track progress on a visible scoreboard. And when the quarter ends, everyone gets to celebrate the achievement together, or commiserate and learn from falling short. The data discipline priorities alone aren't enough. You also need data, both quantitative and qualitative, to know whether you're making progress and to identify obstacles before they become crises. On the quantitative side, every person in the organization should have 1 or 2 key performance indicators that tell them whether they had a good day or a good week. These should be leading indicators, measures of activities that drive results, not the results themselves, and they should be visible, ideally on scoreboards that everyone can see. On the qualitative side, leaders need to be systematically gathering input from employees and customers. There should be a rhythm of direct conversations where leaders ask simple questions. What should we start doing? What should we stop doing? What should we keep doing? This isn't complicated. It's just disciplined, and most organizations lack this discipline. The meeting rhythm. Now we come to what might be the most surprisingly powerful execution discipline, the meeting rhythm. Most people hate meetings. They see them as time, wasting bureaucratic exercises that prevent real work from getting done. But here's the thing. Meetings aren't inherently bad. Bad meetings are bad. Good meetings, the right meetings, held with the right frequency, with the right agendas, are the heartbeat of effective execution. A proper meeting rhythm has 4 frequencies. First, there's the daily huddle, a 5 to 15-minute stand-up meeting where everyone quickly shares what's happening in the next 24 hours, checks daily metrics, and surfaces any obstacles or stucks. This prevents small issues from festering and keeps everyone coordinated without lengthy email chains. Second, there's the weekly meeting, a 60 to 90-minute session where the team reviews progress on quarterly priorities, discusses customer and employee feedback, and tackles 1 or 2 substantive topics that require collective problem-solving. This is where the real work of management happens. Third, there's the monthly meeting, a half-day to full-day gathering where middle managers join the leadership team for learning, problem-solving on bigger issues, and alignment. This is crucial for developing the next generation of leaders and ensuring consistent execution throughout the organization. Fourth, there are the quarterly and annual planning sessions, off-site meetings where the team steps back from day-to-day operations to update the strategic plan, set new priorities, and refresh the vision. The key insight here is that these meetings don't add time, they save time. When you have a proper meeting rhythm, you eliminate the countless ad hoc interruptions, email chains, and hallway conversations that consume far more time than structured meetings ever would. You know that most issues can wait for the daily huddle or the weekly meeting, so you don't feel the need to interrupt colleagues constantly. The accountability connection. All of these execution disciplines serve one ultimate purpose: accountability. When priorities are clear, data is visible, and meetings create regular check-in points, it becomes impossible to hide. Everyone knows what they committed to do, and everyone knows whether they did it. This isn't about creating a punitive environment where people fear making mistakes. It's about creating an environment where commitments are taken seriously and where people can count on each other to follow through. When accountability is weak, the most capable people get frustrated carrying the load for those who aren't pulling their weight. When accountability is strong, trust and performance both increase. The key takeaway: execution requires simple but counterintuitive disciplines. Focusing on one priority at a time, gathering data relentlessly, and establishing meeting rhythms that seem like they would add time but actually save it. The goal is to create an environment where accountability is natural and commitments are honored. Reflection prompt: what's your organization's current meeting rhythm? Are you having the right conversations with the right frequency, or are you drowning in ad hoc communication while the important strategic work gets neglected? Chapter 7. The Cash Flow Reality Summary. You can have brilliant strategy, healthy culture, and flawless execution, but if you run out of cash, none of it matters. This chapter explores the financial disciplines that keep organizations alive and thriving. We'll learn why growth consumes cash rather than generating it, how to understand the key financial levers that determine your fate, and how to build a business model that generates cash rather than consuming it. By the end, you'll see finance not as a necessary evil, but as the oxygen that makes everything else possible. Here's something that surprises most entrepreneurs: the faster you grow, the more cash you consume. It seems counterintuitive. Growth means more customers, more revenue, more success, right? But here's what actually happens. When you're growing, you have to hire people before the revenue from those people arrives. You have to buy inventory before you can sell it. You have to invest in equipment, facilities, marketing, all before seeing $1 of return. This is what I call the first law of entrepreneurial gravity. Growth sucks cash. And if you don't understand this law, you can find yourself in the terrifying position of running a successful company that's about to go bankrupt. The cash conversion cycle. The key metric for understanding your cash situation is something called the cash conversion cycle. It measures how long it takes for $1 spent on your business to make its way back into your pocket. Here's how it works. Let's say you run a manufacturing company. You spend money on raw materials. That's cash going out. Those materials sit in inventory for a while before they're turned into products. Then you sell the products, but the customer doesn't pay immediately. You give them 30, 60, or 90 days to pay. Finally, the payment arrives, and that dollar has completed its journey. The cash conversion cycle is the total number of days from when you spend the dollar to when you get it back. If you pay your suppliers in 30 days, hold inventory for 45 days, and collect from customers in 60 days, your cycle is 75 days. That means you need to finance 75 days' worth of operations before you see a dollar back. Now imagine you're growing fast. Your sales double. Congratulations. But your cash conversion cycle means you need twice as much cash to finance those sales. You're growing broke, increasing revenue while running out of money. This is what almost killed Michael Dell's company in its early years. Dell was growing so fast that it was consuming cash faster than it could generate it. The solution was brilliant in its simplicity. Dell figured out how to collect from customers before paying suppliers. Customers paid by credit card when they ordered, but Dell paid suppliers 30 days after receiving components. This gave Dell a negative cash conversion cycle. It was receiving cash before spending it. The faster Dell grew, the more cash it generated rather than consumed. Not every business can achieve a negative cash conversion cycle, but every business can improve its cycle. The key is understanding the levers, the 7 financial levers. There are 7 levers that affect your cash position, and understanding them is the difference between financial mastery and constant cash crises. First, price. Increasing your prices by even 1% can have a dramatic impact on cash flow because that additional revenue drops almost entirely to the bottom line. Yet most businesses are terrified of raising prices and spend far more energy on cost, cutting than on pricing. Second, volume. Selling more units at the same price obviously helps, but only if your cash conversion cycle can handle the growth. Otherwise, more volume means more cash consumption, not more cash generation. Third, cost of goods sold. Reducing what you pay for materials and direct labor improves both profitability and cash flow. Fourth, operating expenses. Cutting overhead costs frees up cash, though you have to be careful not to cut into the capabilities that drive growth. Fifth, accounts receivable. Collecting from customers faster, even 1 day faster, puts cash in your pocket sooner. This is often the easiest lever to pull, yet many companies have sloppy collection processes. Sixth, inventory. Reducing the amount of inventory you hold frees up cash that's sitting on shelves rather than in your bank account. Seventh, accounts payable. Paying suppliers slower conserves cash, though you have to balance this against maintaining good supplier relationships. The Power of One exercise involves calculating the impact of a 1% or 1 day improvement in each of these levers. For most companies, the numbers are eye-opening. A 1 day reduction in accounts receivable might free up tens of thousands of dollars. A 1% price increase might generate hundreds of thousands in additional cash flow. The profit-cash disconnect. One of the most dangerous misconceptions in business is that profit equals cash. It doesn't. You can be highly profitable on paper and still go broke. How is this possible? Because profit is an accounting concept, while cash is a reality. Profit includes non-cash items like depreciation. Profit doesn't reflect the cash tied up in growing inventory or unpaid customer invoices. Profit can be manipulated through accounting choices. Cash can't. This is why every business leader should receive a daily cash report, not a monthly P&L statement. A daily report showing exactly how much cash came in, how much went out, and where it went. This simple practice transforms your relationship with cash. You start to feel the rhythm of cash flowing through the business. You notice problems before they become crises. You make better decisions because you understand the immediate cash implications. The accounting blind spot. Most accounting systems are designed for tax compliance, not for management decision-making. They tell you what happened in the past, but give you little insight into what's happening now or what will happen in the future. Good accounting for management purposes requires slicing and dicing the numbers in ways that reveal the truth about your business. Which customers are actually profitable? Which products? Which locations? The answer is often surprising and different from what the aggregate numbers suggest. Waterfall graphs are a powerful tool for this. You rank customers from most profitable to least profitable and create a bar chart showing cumulative profitability. What you typically find is that a small percentage of customers generate all the profit, while many customers actually cost you money. The profitable customers subsidize the unprofitable ones. This doesn't necessarily mean you should fire the unprofitable customers. Some of them might be strategic. They provide volume that helps cover fixed costs, or they're reference accounts that help you win other business. But you should at least know the truth. Most business leaders don't. Building a cash-generating machine. The ultimate goal is to build a business that generates cash rather than consuming it. This means designing your business model so that the cash conversion cycle works in your favor. Membership models are one approach. Think Costco, where membership fees provide a steady stream of cash before any products are sold. Subscription models are another. Think software as a service companies, where customers pay monthly or annually in advance. Prepayment models work for many service businesses. Think of consultants who bill in advance rather than in arrears. Even in traditional business models, there are always opportunities to improve cash flow. Can you ask customers to pay a deposit before work begins? Can you negotiate better payment terms with suppliers? Can you streamline your production process to reduce inventory? Can you invoice more frequently or collect more aggressively? These aren't just financial questions, they're strategic questions. Your approach to cash reflects your approach to business. Companies that manage cash well tend to manage everything else well. Companies that are sloppy with cash tend to be sloppy everywhere else. The key takeaway: cash is the oxygen of business. Understanding your cash conversion cycle, managing the 7 financial levers, and building a business model that generates rather than consumes cash are not just financial disciplines, they're survival skills. Reflection prompt: do you know your company's cash conversion cycle? If not, can you calculate it? What's one change you could make this month to improve it by even one day? Chapter 8. The Scaling Challenge. Summary: growing an organization from small to large isn't just about doing more of what you're already doing. It requires fundamentally changing how you operate. This chapter explores the predictable stages of growth, the barriers that prevent scaling, and the leadership capabilities required to navigate the journey successfully. By the end, you'll understand why growth feels so difficult and what you need to do differently at each stage. There's a pattern I've observed in hundreds of organizations, and it's both predictable and avoidable. The company starts small, a founder with a vision, maybe a few early employees, everyone crowded into a single room. Communication is easy because everyone can hear everything. Decisions happen quickly because the founder can just make them. Culture happens naturally because everyone can see how the founder behaves. Then the company grows. 10 employees, 20, 50, 100. And suddenly, everything that worked before stops working. Communication breaks down because not everyone can be in the same room anymore. Decisions bottleneck because the founder can't be involved in everything. Culture dilutes because new employees don't absorb the founder's values by osmosis. This is the scaling challenge. And most founders hit it like a wall. The valleys of death growth isn't a smooth upward trajectory. It's a series of leaps across what I call valleys of death. Transition points where the old way of operating stops working, but the new way hasn't been established yet. The first valley appears around 10 employees. At this point, the founder can no longer directly supervise everyone. They need to start delegating, which requires trusting others to make decisions. This is psychologically difficult for most founders, who are used to controlling everything. The second valley appears around 25 employees. Now you need formal processes for hiring, for financial management, for internal communication. You can't just wing it anymore. This is where many founders rebel, because processes feel bureaucratic and antithetical to the entrepreneurial spirit that built the company. The third valley appears around 50 to 70 employees. Now you need middle managers, a layer of leadership between the founder and the front line. This is perhaps the hardest transition because it requires the founder to let go of direct relationships with many employees and trust managers to represent the company's values and priorities. The fourth valley appears around 350 to 500 employees. Now you need a full executive team with clear functional responsibilities. The founder's role shifts from doing the work to building the organization that does the work. At each of these transition points, the skills that made you successful at the previous stage become insufficient and sometimes counterproductive at the next stage. The founder who was brilliant at personally selling to early customers may become the bottleneck preventing the company from building a scalable sales organization. The hands-on technical genius may become the obstacle preventing the company from developing processes that don't depend on their personal expertise. The leadership requirements. Scaling requires leaders to develop 3 specific capabilities: prediction, delegation, and repetition. Prediction means staying connected to the market so you can anticipate what's coming. This gets harder as the organization grows because leaders get pulled into internal management and lose direct contact with customers and frontline employees. The solution is to build disciplines that force market contact, regular customer visits, systematic feedback gathering, weekly review of competitive intelligence. Delegation means trusting others to do things you used to do yourself. This is psychologically difficult because it requires accepting that others will do things differently than you would, and sometimes less well. The key is to build feedback systems that catch problems early, rather than trying to prevent problems by doing everything yourself. Repetition means communicating the same core messages over and over until you're sick of hearing yourself. Most leaders drastically underestimate how much repetition is required for messages to sink in throughout a growing organization. They assume that saying something once is sufficient. It's not. Employees are bombarded with messages every day. Your strategic priorities are competing with hundreds of other demands for their attention. If you're not constantly reinforcing what matters, it will get lost, the infrastructure imperative. As an organization grows, its internal complexity grows even faster. The number of communication channels increases exponentially with each new person added. This is why organizations need increasingly sophisticated infrastructure, systems for managing information, coordinating work, and maintaining alignment. This infrastructure is often resisted. It feels like bureaucracy. It slows things down,